Good afternoon, everyone. We'll be getting started here in just a moment. I know there are a few people still joining, and so we'll take about 30 more seconds and then we'll get started. Okay, perfect. So we will go ahead and get started now. Just by way of introduction, my name is Ryan Hirsch, and I serve as Director of Market Development for Surgent. And today, what we're going to be talking about is passing the CPA exam in 3 weeks. And really, what we're focusing on is a CPA exam section and passing that in 3 weeks. And so that may sound pretty aggressive, but it's certainly possible. And so today, we're going to show you how you can actually do that as you're sitting for the exam. But before we get started, I do want to let you all know that there will be time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. However, feel free to use the Q&A section or the chat box in order to ask questions during the presentation as well. And if I see those, I'll be glad to pause and answer those if time permits. So feel free to use those, but again, we will make time towards the end for Q&A as well. Okay, so one of the first things that we think about when you talk about passing the CPA exam in 3 weeks, when should you take the exam? The timing is very important. One of the things that we recommend doing is taking it as close to graduation as possible and as close to your study experience as possible. And what we mean by study experience is that when you're using a CPA exam review course, you don't want to necessarily use it and then you're studying and reviewing all the materials, and then 3 or 4 months later you take the exam. You want to go ahead and schedule your exam and take it right when you finish studying, or maybe even schedule it before you finish, but you want to make sure that you continue studying in the platform until you are ready to take the exam. So that's one thing I want to share with you. Another thing is, when you are applying for the exam, I do want you all to know that it can take up to 6 weeks. Sometimes it's closer to 4, but it can take up to 6 weeks. And so make sure that you think that through when you're looking at your schedule for trying to pass the exam within the allotted time frame. Make sure you allow 6 weeks to receive your notice to schedule after you submit your application. Where you will apply for the exam is on NASBA's website. So nasba.org/exams/CPA exam. That's where you can go to get all the information you need in order to be prepared to sit for the CPA exam and to submit your application. Okay, one thing that I'm sure you are already familiar with, but I just want to remind you, you do have an 18-month window in which you have to pass all 4 sections of the CPA exam. And so that's why when we talk about passing a section in 3 weeks, that's why this is so important, is figuring out how can you study in a way that allows you to be fully prepared to pass the exam in a shorter amount of time. Because if you run out of that 18-month window, then the sections that you have already passed will actually expire. And so it's very important that, especially if you're creeping up on that 18-month time frame, that you want to go ahead and pass as many sections as you can before they start to expire. So that's something that's really important. Now, one of the things that we recommend from a sequence standpoint is we recommend starting with the FAR section of the exam first. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that from an opinion standpoint and from a pass rate standpoint, many people feel like FAR is one of the most challenging and difficult sections to pass. And what we don't want to happen is for someone to pass these first 3 sections, audit, reg, and BEC, and then they struggle to pass FAR, and then they end up having some of these other 3 sections expire because they didn't pass FAR within that 18-month window. So what we encourage you to do is go ahead and pass FAR first, and that way, that's when your 18-month window starts counting down, and then you can move forward with the momentum to go ahead and complete the remaining 3 sections. The other reason that we recommend this particular order is because there are elements of FAR that are embedded within the remaining 3 sections, so audit, reg, and BEC. And so if you master FAR first, then it's actually going to help you as you complete some of these other sections. So that's something that's really important. Now I want to talk a little bit about study time. So as you can see here, these are estimates of the amount of study time that is required to go through the multiple choice questions and simulations in our CPA exam review course. And so for FAR, the average study time, what we see is about 76 hours. For audit, you can see it's a little bit less. Audit is 46.5, BEC is 48.5, and then reg is 60.5. And so as you can see, even with the study time, FAR appears to be the one where people have to spend the most time in order to get to that passing level. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple of different plans that you can utilize in order to pass within that 18-month window. So if you were, let's say you were on the 8-month plan, so you want to pass the exam, all 4 parts within the next 8 months. So here, what I'm showing you is that we have to make sure they're falling within the exam windows. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, an exam testing window is open essentially the first 2 months and 10 days of each quarter. So for example, the quarter that we are about to be in right now is the October 1st through December 10th window. And so that is the window you'll have to take your exam anytime in October or November or up until December 10th. Then in December 11th through 31st, that's a blackout period where you are not allowed to take the exam. And so you want to make sure that you fit it within this window. Now, what we recommend you do if you're trying to pass within the 8-month window is, for example, you'll want to go ahead and maybe schedule FAR towards the end of October. So maybe the first, if you're starting now, the first 3 weeks of October, that's a time where we would recommend maybe the first 3 or 4 weeks you're studying for FAR, and then you take it that last week in October. Then you can spend the next few weeks, maybe 3 weeks, studying for audit, and then you can take audit towards the end of November. Maybe if you don't want to do it right around Thanksgiving, you could do it at the beginning of December. So sometime around the 3rd or 4th of December may be an ideal time for you there. Then again, we're coming up to the blackout period, and then a new period starts in January. And from there, what we would recommend is, again, go ahead and have your holiday break during that blackout period. And then maybe you just take a mental break to say, you know what, I passed 2 sections, and now let's take a little bit of break to refresh and recharge in January. And then what I'm going to do is then I'll study 3 more weeks at some point between the end of January and the beginning of February. And then at some point in February, I'm going to go ahead and sit for the reg section. After that, I will, the blackout period again comes on March 11th. And so we're going to take a break here. And then we're going to go ahead and start after that, take a few weeks off, then go ahead and study 3 more weeks. And then you'll be ready in mid to late April to go ahead and tackle the BEC section. So that's if you were on an 8-month plan to pass the exam. If you want to be a little bit more aggressive, what I would recommend is the 6-month plan. And so with that, what we're going to do, again, is basically take the month of October to study and then schedule your exam for FAR at the end of October, then take the 3 weeks, the first 3 weeks of November, and then plan either in the last week of November or the first week of December, go ahead and take audit. Then in January, we're going to go ahead and study 3 weeks, the first 3 weeks of January, but you can also combine some of this time with the last 3 weeks of December if you want to have some of that blackout period to use for studying. And then so you could either take that towards the beginning of January if you study in December, or study at the beginning of January, and then towards the end of January, you'll be ready for reg. Then in February, again, study the first 3 weeks or so, and then at the end of February, you can go ahead and take BEC, and you'll be ready to pass that one in that time frame. So that's, if you want to be a little bit more aggressive, that is the time period I would recommend, is the 6-month plan. Now, I want to go back to the sequence of what exams we're going to take first. Again, FAR is the one that is kind of the outlier that you'll need to spend the most time for. And so we have 76 hours of study time there, and I'm actually going to show you a calendar of what your study schedule might look like. FAR is one of the sections that I would say, again, the most important thing for you here, you do want to take it quickly from the standpoint of making sure you pass within that 18-month window. But obviously, the most important thing here is to pass the exam. And so what I would recommend is that if you were going to spend more than 3 weeks on any section, I would probably do it on this first one for FAR. And if you think about it, if you're taking that one first, then that 18-month window isn't really counting against you yet. And so go ahead, and when you're getting familiar with your test prep software, when you are really just trying to get your mind wrapped around what are my study habits and schedules going to look like, that's a good time to maybe say, okay, let's go ahead and take a little bit longer with FAR if you want to. And I'll explain some more about that time frame in just a little bit. So as you're developing your study plan, this is a study plan that accounts for the 76 hours if you were doing FAR. So what it might look like is, you can see most of these days during the week have approximately 3 hours that you're studying. Then we actually recommend taking a break. It sounds great on paper to say that you're going to study 7 days a week, maybe 10 hours a day, but in truth, it's just not realistic. Between school, work, family, all these sorts of things, it's not really realistic to be able to study every day with no breaks. And so it's actually healthy to go ahead and build in a day of your choosing to kind of pause and refresh your mind. And so for this example, I've just included Friday. And that's a kind of a blackout day for you, where you say, you know what, I'm not going to study. I'm going to go out with friends. I'm just going to enjoy myself a little bit. And then I'll get back to it on Saturday and Sunday. And then Saturday and Sunday, maybe if you're not working or not going to school on those days, then maybe you can study a little bit longer. So maybe a 4-hour session on Saturday and Sunday, respectively. But then that last week before the exam, you may want to ramp it up and say, okay, let's do 4 hours, every day, just about. And so this is kind of a sample of what I would recommend you do. And I would actually, whether you do it digitally or have a calendar, I would actually make a calendar just like this that outlines exactly when you plan to study. In fact, one of the things that I really like is doing it on a digital calendar, because I can set alerts and notifications and actually block it out on my schedule. So when someone says, hey, are you available on this date? I can check my phone and say, you know what, actually I'm not. I'm during this window of time, I'm actually going to be studying. And so that's a good way to always have your calendar with you and make sure that you allot the proper amount of study time. Okay, so for the CPA exam format, one of the things I want to share with you here is that the exam actually has 5 different testlets. The first 2 testlets will be for multiple choice questions. And so what you can see here in this graphic is that we have each of the sections outlined here. And then if you go on these rows, you can see that the amount of multiple choice questions that you can expect to see in each of the first 2 testlets. And then the last 3 testlets will be for your simulations, or if you're taking the BEC section, your written communication as well. Now, one thing, getting back to your time management and being able to actually pass in this aggressive time period, one of the things that I'm going to recommend that you do is, when you are taking your practice exam, I want you to determine whether or not you need to use any of these optional breaks. So the way the exam is structured, after each testlet, you will have an opportunity for a break. However, this break does go against your time. So you have 4 hours to take the exam, and if you leave the room, this will actually count against your time. After testlet 3, you will be granted a 15-minute break that will not count against your time, but all of the other ones do. Now, sometimes people say, well, should I take the break? Should I not? And I would say it really depends, because part of it is if your stomach is growling, if you really need to use the restroom, anything like that, or maybe you just felt like testlet 1 was really challenging and you're kind of mentally drained. If your mind is distracted, that's not going to bode well for the rest of the exam. So if you have any of those distractions kind of in your head, go ahead and take the break. Conversely, if you feel like you have a lot of momentum going and things are going well, then move right on along to testlet 2, and then just make that same evaluation at the end of each testlet. But again, one of the things I really encourage you to do is, if at all possible, save as much time for these simulations as you can, because that's really going to help you take the proper amount of time to answer those in detail. From a weighting standpoint, one of the things I want you to do as you're studying, so one of the challenges that individuals have sometimes is that when they're studying, especially if you're trying to do it in 3 weeks, you may be tempted to do a couple of different things. One, you may be tempted to just focus on multiple choice questions, because that's where most people start answering questions. And so you may say, well, if I understand the concepts in the multiple choice questions, then I should be able to get the simulations. Well, the challenge with that is, as you can see here, the simulations count 50% of your score, just as the multiple choice questions count 50%. And so if you haven't taken the proper amount of time to practice those simulations, then that's going to be a challenge for you, because you may not be familiar with it. And if you're not familiar, you can kind of develop some anxiety as you're taking the exam. And so I highly encourage you, as you're breaking out your 3 weeks, and our platform will actually help you do this, but as you're breaking out your 3 weeks of studying, I recommend that for the first couple of weeks, you are working on those multiple choice questions, mastering those, but then make sure you dedicate at least a week or so to these task-based simulations, because that is really going to help you when it comes time to the exam. Now, I will say these are the weights for FAR, audit, and reg. BEC is similar but slightly different in that it adds a written communication section. So 15% of your score will come from written communication, which is somewhat like an essay. 35% will come from the simulations, and 50% will come from the multiple choice questions. So again, as you're studying, you want to make sure you allot a couple of days to the written communication so that you can just really be adequately prepared for that particular section. Okay, now a couple of other things I want to give you a strategy on related to your multiple choice questions. So you want to get through these multiple choice questions as quickly as possible without leaving any of them blank. And when I say don't leave them blank, I mean that a couple of different ways. So one, you don't want to leave any answers blank when you turn in your exam. However, I'll just share an experience that I had when I was taking an exam one time. I flagged questions and intended to come back to them later because I didn't immediately know the answer. Well, as it turns out, when I got towards the end of my time for that particular testlet, I started running out of time, and I intended to go back, but I wasn't able to get back and answer all of the questions that I had flagged. And so one of the things that I would recommend is that when you are flagging a question, go ahead and make an educated guess first. So yes, you may flag it to come back to it, but in the event that you don't have time to get back to it, at least you'll have a 25% chance of getting the answer correct if you marked something before you moved on. So I would just say, from my experience, I would never leave a question blank, even if you intend to come back to it later. Now, the other thing is spend an average of 1 minute and 15 seconds per multiple choice question. One of the things that I want to highlight here is that it's an average of 1 minute and 15 seconds. I can tell you firsthand, as you're doing some of these questions, you know as well as I do, you cannot complete every question within a minute and a half or a minute and 15 seconds. However, there are some questions that are going to take you 3 or 4 minutes, and there are others that are going to take you 10 to 15 seconds. Some of those are your glossary terms, some of the definitions, or certain rules and guidelines. You may easily know those. And so what we want to do is, I recommend pacing it out. And so you may say, okay, at the 30-minute mark, into the exam, I need to have answered X number of questions, or after 1 hour, I need to have answered X number of questions. And then just kind of evaluate, how am I tracking? Am I on pace to finish this in the appropriate amount of time? Because if you spend too much time on one question, it can derail you and cause you to not have enough time to finish your simulations or even some of the other multiple choice questions. So that's something that's really important as well. Now, another reason that I want you to go through those questions as quickly as possible, is that some of the questions that you'll see are actually pre-test questions that the examiners have used. And what that means is that they're experimental and will not count against your grade. Unfortunately, you will not know which questions are real and which questions are experimental. But the real lesson here that I want you to take is that I don't want you to spend 7 or 8 minutes on a really difficult question that you say, I don't recall seeing this when I was studying. This really doesn't look familiar to me. I'm trying to figure it out. And you may waste 7 or 8 minutes on a question that doesn't even count against your grade because perhaps it's one of these experimental questions. And so what I would say is go ahead and utilize that time to focus on the questions that you do know the answers to, so you can get credit for those correct answers. So I just want to make you aware of that. 15 to 20% of the questions will be experimental. So try not to get stuck on those. Some of the simulations that you'll see regular task-based simulations, which you're probably familiar with. These will take about 12 to 15 minutes to solve. The enhanced task-based simulations, these are actually very similar to the regular sims. The main difference is that there are an increased number of exhibits and other materials to go through. And so it just takes a little bit longer, but they're not necessarily harder. They just have more data to sort through. And so those are going to take you a little bit longer to get through, maybe in the 20 to 30 minute range. And then you have your document and research simulations where you're going to be looking through documents, and with the document review simulation, you are going to be basically identifying, it may be a press release or some sort of document that has some financial information in it. And there are going to be some exhibits that you have to look at to say, are the current statements within the document accurate, or do I need to modify that statement to say something different? So that's one thing to be aware of there. With the research simulations, you will have the authoritative literature available to you, and some of the questions may ask you to look through the authoritative literature and get a certain statute or code that they want you to put there. And then again, the written communication for the BEC section, very much like an essay that you would see. One thing I want to make you aware of, there are a lot of questions around Excel. As it is currently used on the exam, it is only meant to be a tool. The CPA exam is not currently testing you on your Excel skills. And so just know that there will be Excel available to you in your testing platform, but it's not something that they're going to be grading you on to see how good you are at Excel. It's merely a tool to help you answer some of the questions a little bit faster at this point in time. Okay, so and now we're going to talk a little bit about the CPA exam challenge, and then after that, I'm going to get into a little bit more about the strategy for how you can actually pass within 3 weeks, because that is a very aggressive time frame. And so in order to make that a reality, you really have to utilize a specialized program that's designed to help you do that. So the challenge with the CPA exam is this. So the exam is seemingly becoming more challenging each year because the examiners are adding more content to the CPA exam each year without necessarily removing content at that same pace. So if you think about it, even things like, let's say cryptocurrency. When something like cryptocurrency gets added to the exam, that doesn't mean that they're also going to remove cash. And so it's important to understand it's not good or bad or otherwise. It's just a fact that information is being added because the examiners have to keep up with the current trends, the current skills that you need to be able to utilize in the workplace. But again, that doesn't mean that things like cash go away. And so you still have to learn all of this extra information. And so that's a challenge because we have busy lives. And honestly, it's just tough to retain that much information. And so that's part of the challenge that we're having. And then again, to pass all 4 parts within 18 months, that is a challenge as well. So now I want to share what the typical CPA review course looks like. So most of them, you start off with you receive the textbooks and the videos, and you kind of start just like you do in school. You use a linear method of learning where you start at chapter 1 and go through the entire program, one topic at a time. You watch all the videos, read all the textbooks, and answer all the multiple choice questions and simulations that are available. So the first problem with this approach is that it takes a really long time. So the estimate here is 150 to 280 hours in terms of completing those types of courses, because they're so content heavy. It's just a lot of data to consume. And so that is one of the challenges with it, is that with school, with work, and other activities that you have going on, it's really difficult to carve out 150 to 280 study hours when you're trying to pass one section of the exam. That's a lot. And then the other part is, even if you've studied all that content, you still don't know for sure that you are ready to pass the exam. And some of the content that you study maybe in your 20th or 30th hour of studying, you may have forgotten by the 200th hour, because it's been so long if you're studying months at a time. And so that's part of the reason that our platform was designed to help you study more efficiently and in a shorter amount of time. So our solution to this is that we start off each user with an assessment. And so that assessment basically identifies what you know already and what you still need to know. And so it kind of highlights your strengths and weaknesses so that you can identify, okay, you know what? In corporate governance and economic concepts and analysis, I'm actually doing really well there. I understand those concepts pretty well. So the best use of my time during this 3 weeks of studying may not be spending a lot of time watching these videos for economic concepts and analysis, or even corporate governance, because that, even though it may be good content to know, it's not going to raise your score very much because you're already highly proficient in those areas. Now, what is going to raise your score is if you spend your time studying more about financial management, watching those videos to enhance your understanding, doing more practice questions related to those topics, because that is going to say, okay, now, if you study economic concepts and analysis, maybe you can raise this from a 90 to a 92. But here, maybe you can go from a 57 to a 70, or 57 to a 75 or 80. This is where you have a lot more room for growth and an opportunity to actually boost your full exam score. And so this is where we want you to be spending your time, is focusing on your weak areas. Now, there will still be an element within our program. We use adaptive technology that still exposes you to these questions, because again, we want to keep it fresh. We want to make sure that it's not something that you forget. So you'll still be exposed to these questions and have opportunities to study them. However, from a percentage standpoint, we don't want you to spend an equal amount of time on all of these topics. This is the topic that for you, you're going to need to study more than others. The other thing is, so my mom was a teacher for 30 years. And one of her biggest challenges is, she said, in a classroom of 30 students, I may have 10 who felt like I was teaching too fast and wanted me to slow down. I had 10 who felt like my pace was just right and they didn't want me to change a thing. And then 10 felt like I was going too slow and they were saying, pick up the pace. And so that's kind of the challenge with giving a one-size-fits-all review course, is that your base level of knowledge may be completely different than someone else. And so what we want to do is make sure that we are personalizing your study program. And so what we do is give you a daily surge. And this daily surge is customized specifically for you to say, based on the results of your assessment, based on your ready score, based on what the progress you've been making in the course, here's what we recommend you study in terms of the practice questions that you complete. here are the specific videos that we recommend that you watch based on what our system is telling us that you need. And then here are the reference materials that we recommend that you read. Those are going to be extremely important to you, whereas another user may need a different set of videos because they may already be proficient in these areas. But the bottom line, if you already know that 2 + 2 is 4, then you don't really need to watch a lot of videos about simple addition. That's a concept that you know, and we really don't need to reinforce that a ton. It's better to move on to the long division and exponents and things of that nature, just to give you kind of that analogy there. Now, one other thing that I want to show you is that a second ago, I showed you these primary categories. And so that is where you can see your full score in each category. Now, you can also drill down. So these are the main topics. So for example, federal taxation of individuals, this user has an 86, but you can get very specific by drilling down into these subtopics. So if I look at not just category 4, but look at 4A, 4B, and 4C, I can identify that I still need to do a little bit more work in gross income, as well as adjustments and deductions for gross income and taxable income. And so one of the things that you can do is figure out, how many questions are available to me, how many have I answered correctly, and when is the last time I studied this? If I studied this 32 weeks ago, maybe that's not as fresh on my mind as it should be. So maybe I want to go back through that section and just try a few practice questions. And so I can hit this pencil icon and go back and specifically study those questions. So that's one thing that I want to point you to as well. Now, when you're doing these practice questions, I also want to show you the instant feedback that you'll get. Sometimes when we take exams, we'll get a question wrong, and then we think, okay, I need to make a note to myself, and then I'll go back and try to study that in the textbook or try to watch a video on that. Well, that is an appropriate approach. However, it's not as ideally efficient as it could be. So what we've done is giving you this information in real time. So for example, this user answered the question with this selection, and it's marked in red to show that it's incorrect. The correct answer is highlighted here in green. And then over here on the right, we give an explanation of not only what the correct answer is, but why some of the other answer options are not correct. Then right here in real time, we're going to provide you with either video links and or relevant terms that show you, okay, if you missed this question, maybe you need to watch this particular video because this covers, the topics that you just missed a question on. And so if you want to go watch a video right now, you don't have to go search through a textbook or search through the videos. You can just see it in real time. And the same with these terms. Maybe you got this question wrong because you didn't fully understand some of the terminology in the question. And so you can look here for these relevant terms. Okay, so that's kind of how you can navigate the platform and really have a more efficient study process. Because again, if you're trying to pass it in 3 weeks, you don't have time to waste restudying things that you've already mastered or things that are not going to help move your score from point A to point B. The goal here is to get a 75 or higher on the exam. And again, if you are continuing to go through questions that you already know, that's not going to yield you the results that you're looking for. You need to challenge yourself to master the content that you're not familiar with. And the only way to do that is to take the assessment and get some sort of indicator while you're studying of what areas you need to focus on. Now, from a pass rate standpoint, with Surgent, our pass rates, and give or take, depending on what section you're in, we have about an 88% pass rate for our users. And now the national pass rate is around 50%, give or take what section you're referring to. So almost 40%, or I'm sorry, 40 points higher than the national average is what you can expect with using our platform. Then we also have what's called a ready score. Now this ready score is a projection of what score you would receive if you were to sit for the exam today. And it will tell you when you're ready to sit for the exam. And so what I'll tell you here is that the ready score is accurate within 4 points of your actual exam score. And so what we recommend to our users is that if you need a 75 to pass the exam, we recommend that you get an 80 or higher in our system. That way, even if it's 3 or 4 points off, you still have a high likelihood of passing the exam. and you can pass with the confidence of knowing that you're ready because of your ready score. One of the other big issues with taking the exam is the anxiety and uncertainty about, I feel like I studied a lot, but I have no clue whether I'm actually ready. And so with our ready score, that is something that can help you move in with a positive mindset, saying, you know what, the system already told me I'm ready, so I'm in good shape there. The measured progress. Most of our users, the average ready score that they start with after the assessment is a 43, and then they work their way up to about an 82, either on or before their exam date. And so over that 3 to 4 week period, that is typically the progress that we see users make, is going from a 43 to an 82. And then again, depending on what section you're in, the average for your study time is about 58 hours. I showed you the specific chart earlier showing, some of the sections are about 40 hours, some of them are closer to 70, but on average, about 58 hours of studying per section, and you'll be ready to get this 82 for your exam. So that is kind of the plan that we recommend. For our review courses, we're talking about the CPA review course today, but I do want to let you know that we have an EA review course, as well as CMA, CIA, and CISA as well. And they're all built on this same efficient learning platform. Okay, so now I will go ahead and I've put my email address up here. If you have any questions, please feel free to email them to me. I will stay on the line just in case anyone has any specific questions about your study schedule, or just some things about the platform, or any additional questions you may have. I'll be on the line to answer any of those that you have. But again, if you have a private question that you prefer not to share in the group, please feel free to email me here, and I will certainly be glad to help. But thanks again for joining us, and best of luck on the CPA exam. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions yet, so I'm going to log off. But again, my email address is hirschr@surgent.com. That's HIRSCHR@SURGENT.com. And so if there's ever any way I can help or any questions I can answer, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I'll be glad to do so. Have a great day.